before we continue, let's have a common understanding about what time we will adjourn this afternoon. Yesterday we spoke about the possibility of going up to 5 if necessary, but later on we decided to start at 9, one hour earlier. But I think we didn't have clarification whether, because we started at 9, we would stop at 4, or whether, if necessary, we could still go to 5. Maybe, Mr. President, what is your situation?
I'm at your service,
Yes.
Chairperson.
Okay. Okay, no, thank you. Okay, Mr. Pretorius, so we'll see how it goes, but the President is able to go up to 5 if we need to. Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. I did negotiate 5:10 with his office. So we'll see how it goes.
No, that's all right. Okay. Okay, let's continue.
Thank you. Mr. President, would you look at what is known as the Diagnostic Report of July 2017? You will recognize that document. It's in Bundle 1 at page 836, or that is certainly the passage I'd like to refer to. For the record, the first page of the document is on page 821. It is a document prepared, I understand, for the national policy.
I'm sorry, Mr. Pretorius. You said 835, but I think you said another page after that.
Yes. The document begins at page 821.
Yes. You want us to go to that page?
Yes, please. It's a document dated July 2017. It's known as a diagnostic report, and it was prepared for the July 2017 conference. Is that correct? If you go to page 836, and you refer to this report, Mr. President, in paragraph 131 of your own statement, that's on page 58 of Bundle 1. And it's the date of the statement that is important, as well as, of course, the content. It reads, "The public outcry about the influence of the Gupta family has led to investigations by both the Office of the Public Protector and the South African Council of Churches. Serious allegations were made against a number of the leaders of the ANC. Instead of dealing with the reality facing the movement, a defense was developed by using the real threats we face as a movement. A narrative was developed to link any discomfort with the influence of the Gupta family to the regime change agenda. While it must be acknowledged that regime change is a real threat that needs to be analyzed and a strategy to defend the country, and the movement needs to be developed, this cannot be used as a response to the perception or reality of corruption. Both objective and subjective factors in this regard need to be understood." And then in paragraph 6.5, another defense that has been bandied about is the one that counterposes the behavior of this family to brackets white, close brackets, monopoly capital. White monopoly capital is invented as if it is a new phenomenon, instead of affirming that its defeat is at the heart of the revolution and the essence of NDR. And then in the middle of paragraph 6.6, 5 lines down, the statement is made that society, on the other front, expects the ANC to take a stand against corruption by taking serious action or being seen to do so. It seems that this document, Mr. President, and the short passages I've referred to indicate what you've referred to as internal contestation, that there was within the governing party, and I think it's no secret, an internal contest. And that is a period through which the ruling or governing party went during the period under review. It seems here that what you refer to as the line being drawn had its origins, the most recent line being drawn. It had been drawn many times over 20 years, but is that correct?
Yes, yes.
Then if you go to the December 2015 NASREC 54th Conference Report, that's in Bundle 1, page 256. You refer to it as well in paragraph 133 and following of your own statement. And many of these statements that I put to you in fairness have not been discovered by us. They're in your own statement.
Sure.
Page 256 of Bundle 1.
Yes.
There is on that page a resolution that was taken at the conference, and I would just like, if I may, to refer to certain parts of that resolution. It's resolution headed ANC Credibility and Integrity Dealing with Corruption. The first bullet reads, an increase in corruption, factionalism, dishonesty, and other negative practices that seriously threaten the goals and support of the ANC. Again, the phrase an increase in corruption, it's not the first time it's been used. We pointed it out this morning. The third bullet, that corruption robs our people of billions that could be used for their benefit. The fifth bullet, that current leadership structures seem helpless to arrest these practices, either because they lack the means or the will, or are themselves held hostage by them. Now, I understand, Mr. President, that you are here as a party leader, and what is said and how it is said is important in relation to, let me say, how the party responds to issues and strategies going forward. No one is blind to that fact. But what is being referred to there? Is it correct to assume that one is talking about the hold that previous leadership have over the party?
Yes. The leadership should be seen as a continuum. That leadership of the ANC, and this is what in large measure distinguishes us from other organizations, that the leadership that we have would have been in place for quite a while, so it continues. But I think what we have is that we are now having to respond to precisely some of the challenges that we face, which you articulated in the noting part on 256, where we say there is an increase in corruption, factionalism, that seriously threatens the goals and support of the ANC. That the leadership right now that has had to draw a line is responding precisely to the increase in corruption, factionalism, and that this problem is not going away. It is continuing to entrench itself by increasing, and therefore it requires drastic action that should be taken, because it is resulting in less and less support for the ANC, weakening the ANC, dividing the ANC, and simply making the ANC less of a modern party by lack of renewing itself, because as a living organism it needs to continue renewing itself, and it remains moribund, and therefore it needs to change, and this is what has led to drawing a line in the sand.
Yes, this is...
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Pretorius. When I see this part of the report, Mr. President, I'm reminded of the fact that earlier this morning when Mr. Freund was leading your evidence and questioning you on parliamentary oversight, there was a time where he made the proposition that it seemed that the portfolio committees, I think he was talking about that, did not have the will or were unwilling to do the necessary to deal with these allegations of the Guptas, their influence on government and so on. But it's interesting that in this report, one of the things that is said is, well, maybe the current leadership doesn't have the means, but maybe it doesn't have the will. Maybe they are themselves held hostage by these challenges. So maybe Mr. Freund might not have been too far from what the ANC itself was talking about. This is 2017, August, I think, and I think he was talking about the period in 2016, if I'm not mistaken.
And this is a resolution of the conference.
Yes. So it seems to me that he might not have been far from what the ANC itself, after analyzing the situation, came to.
Yes, if you do read this noting part, the ANC is being very honest with itself. It's being very realistic.
Yes.
And it goes even further, and this is precisely what we have experienced, sadly, where it also says that at times we do things that are not according to ANC or government policy, or not legal or constitutional, and wait for courts to correct our action. And that is the sad part that this conference was talking about. But it goes on to resolve what now needs to be done, which is precisely what we are now working on.
Yes. So just to put that in its context, in relation to a statement you made, I think it was yesterday, that this is about drawing a line in the sand. What was recognized in this resolution, on the face of it, are two things. Firstly, that corruption had increased and quite simply had become intolerable for the ANC. But secondly, that current leadership was unable to deal with it. Something new had to happen. Is that correct?
That's true.
We will deal with this the next time around, but whilst we're here, Clause 7 of the resolution reads, ANC deployees to Cabinet, especially Finance, Police and Justice, should strengthen the state capacity to successfully investigate and prosecute corruption and account for any failure to do so. There has been, let me put it, overwhelming evidence before the Commission over the last 3 years that law enforcement agencies over the period under review were weakened. Is that fair statement?
Indeed, they were weakened.
but we will deal with that insofar as is necessary in the next session.
Indeed.
A third statement was made in January 2018, and this is again in reference to the drawing of the line. It appears in Bundle 1, page 852, and in your own statement at paragraph 143, you yourself refer to the statement. If I could ask you to turn to page 862, please.
Seem to have made life very easy for you.
As appears from page 852, this is a statement of the National Executive Committee of 8 January 2018.
Yes.
And if I could take it to page 862, please.
That's where I am.
Very clear statement is made, again, which accords with your description of drawing a line in the sand in the fourth paragraph. We shall confront corruption and state capture in all the forms and manifestations that these scourges assume. This includes the immediate establishment of a commission of inquiry into state capture. The investigation and prosecution of those responsible will be given top priority. Mechanisms for the appointment of individuals to senior government positions, state-owned entities, and law enforcement agencies will be strengthened to improve transparency, prevent undue influence, and ensure adequate vetting of candidates. And a lot more is said in the same vein about that renewal, the drawing of the line in the sand, and the move forward. But if we could then fast forward to August 2020, by all accounts, a difficult month for you, Mr. President, as you will remember. But if we could go to Bundle 1, page 934, and you deal with this in paragraph 147 of your statement. This is a statement of the NEC of August 2020.
Yes.
It's an ANC statement on the outcomes of the National Executive Committee meeting. And on page 934, under the head Corruption Drawing a Line, it reads, the ANC is outraged and deeply embarrassed by recent allegations that some, including its own leaders and members, have sought to benefit unlawfully from the devastating suffering and impoverishment caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. These developments cause us collectively to dip our heads in shame and to humble ourselves before the people. We acknowledge the justifiable public outrage caused by the depravity and heartlessness displayed by some elements in government, our organization, and the private sector. We unequivocally condemn all forms of corruption, dishonesty, and state capture involving the public and private sectors, including collusion, price fixing, tender fraud, bribery, illicit financial flows, illegal imports, and misuse of tax havens. We will comprehensively fight corruption, combining both prevention and punishment. Those who loot public resources must face the full might of the law. And then over the page, the moral standing of the ANC has been severely damaged by the conduct of some of its members who in fact do not deserve to be in our ranks. We are committed to draw a clear line, this is another drawing of the line, between our organization and those who steal from the people, thereby subverting the very essence and reason for the ANC's existence as a servant of the people. The next paragraph reads, the meeting recognized that the NEC was clearly mandated at the 54th National Conference to deal decisively with corruption and to restore the integrity and values of the ANC. This is a responsibility it cannot defer, outsource, or avoid, and that's the stage at which the term outsourcing was used as being something that could no longer be done. If I may just refer to two other statements before asking the questions that we need to. If you go to Bundle 1, page 940, this is also dealt with in your statement at paragraph 148. This is a letter to the members of the African National Congress, if I understand it correctly, dated 23 August 2020 and authored by yourself. Is that correct?
Yes.
This is the well-known statement which has caused some controversy. If one goes to page 942, it reads two-thirds the way down the page. Well, let's deal a little more thoroughly with it. On page 942, under the heading, "We need to take responsibility," it reads, as the inheritors of the legacy of Luthuli, Tambo, and Mandela, we must be honest with our people and ourselves. We must acknowledge that our movement, the African National Congress, has been and remains deeply implicated in South Africa's corruption problem. We have to be sensitive to the concerns that are being raised by our people about our role as a movement in corrupt activities. Certain further statements are made, but further down the page, the statement is made, today the ANC and its leaders stand accused of corruption. The ANC may not stand alone in the dock, but it does stand as accused number one. This is the stark reality that we must now confront. And then if we go finally to the presidential newsletter of August 2020, at page 560. Sorry, that's the wrong page. Bundle 2, I'm afraid. I'm sorry, I misled you. Bundle 2, page 560. This is a newsletter.
Hang on, Mr. Pretorius. I'm still waiting for my bundle.
I'm sorry.
What's the page, Mr.
560.
Okay, I'm there.
It reads, this is a communication from yourself, Mr. President, to the nation, in your capacity as President of the nation, but it's appropriate to deal with it now. Dear fellow South African, corruption during a national disaster is a particularly heinous type of crime. and perpetrators are going to be dealt with decisively and harshly. And then a few paragraphs down before the next heading, attempting to profit from a disaster that is claiming the lives of our people every day is the action of scavengers. It is like a pack of hyenas circling wounded prey. And then an issue that I would like to raise later, Mr. President, over the page under the head multidisciplinary approach. You say experience here and in many other countries show that a multidisciplinary approach to tackling the commission of alleged criminality is needed for the fight against corruption to be successful. A broad range of investigative and prosecutorial capabilities need to be brought together under one roof. And that's one issue regarding the way forward that perhaps we can canvass later. But for the present, this is perhaps the strongest language used in a history of 20 years of identifying corruption, corrupt activities, and undertaking for the nation as a whole to deal with it decisively. In other words, and we've seen it before from 2001 and perhaps before that too, in fact before that too, many lines have been drawn in the sand. It's been drawn in the sand repeatedly. The language, particularly under your presidency, has got stronger and less equivocal. But the question remains, in 2018, the line was drawn in the sand. In 2020, the nation reads this. What is it about corruption, and how can it be explained that despite the statements, and let's accept that those statements were made with good faith and serious intent, as we must for the present. What is it about our society that in 2020 you have to say what you have to say about circling hyenas when that line has been drawn decisively so many times before over 20 years?
Chairperson, I do state it quite clearly in my both opening statement and my main statement that over the period, including the period under review, there has been recognition of the malaise of corruption in the ANC. And what I said earlier before the break about this issue of incumbency, that we got into government and we were robed with the powers of the state and ability to manage resources, dispense, patronage, and all that. And we've accepted and admitted in the past that that has resulted in a number of deviant type behaviors. And having recognized this over time, we've said we need to act against it. And with the elapse of time, we've seen the price that is being paid by the people as a whole, as they are deprived of good service delivery because the resources are being diverted, they're being plundered. We've realized that at an economic level, it's having a dent against our economy. And at a social level, it's also having a serious impact. But over and above that, it's also having an impact on the ANC itself, because it results in the breakdown of party discipline, the breakdown of party morality, and the disregard of our principles. And what that leads to is that ANC becomes less attractive to ordinary citizens who should support it, who should join it. finally it leads to election loss or diminishing support that we can see. And with this in mind, we decided that we need to plug those holes so that the ANC can renew itself and regenerate itself. Because if we don't, we're just on a one-way ticket to oblivion, really, to defeat at the polls, and we therefore need to do something. And hitherto, people would have taken paid less regard to the impact that it has on the ANC itself and on our electoral position. This time round, that realization is there, that we've got to change direction and do it at the pain, if you like, of even knowing that we could lose support. And we've seen the decline of our electoral support going down continuously. So all these measures and initiatives and solutions have to be embarked upon so that the ANC rids itself of those who may well be having other intentions on the resources of our people.
Well, it seems to me, Mr. President, that because of the influence that the ANC has in society, and because it is the majority party in parliament, the government is its government, it has a very important role to play in where the country is going. And if one looks at the types of issues that the Commission is investigating, one can see that whatever it is that the ANC may say we did, didn't work. Simply didn't work. That's why corruption has reached the levels that it has reached. That's why we hear the kind of evidence that the Commission has been hearing. So, to the extent that the ANC wishes to be part or to even play an important role, because it must, I think, in changing the situation in the country on these matters, it can't do so, it seems to me, and you may comment on this, by looking at those things that are comfortable for it to change. It can't make a meaningful impact. It can't make a serious contribution to making a meaningful impact on corruption and issues of state capture unless it confronts issues that are painful to confront. And say to change things, we have to do certain things that we are not comfortable to do. So as you prepare to come back later, because even though you will be dealing with matters wearing your cap as president of the country, there's still some homework to do as president of the party, as we discussed yesterday. It's going to be important to really look at what are those really important things that may need to be looked at.
That is so true. And we have gone through a period of what is it? No.
Introspection.
Introspection. Introspection, Chairperson.
Mm-hmm.
And in part, the reason we then decided that we are going to seriously advocate for the establishment of this commission, whilst there was doubt, and whilst there was even talk that this commission could tear the ANC apart. we were brave enough, courageous enough to say this is a necessary process that we must go through as part of our own renewal process. It's almost akin to this legend that is spread around of an eagle that has reached its old age, as it were, and finds that it can no longer catch its prey and feed itself. There's a legend that when that time comes, it withdraws and goes to the highest peak of the mountains, and whilst there, it goes through a process, a very painful process of shedding its claws, of plucking out its feathers. They argue that, and it's a legend, I think, that it bleeds, it goes through pain and suffering, and after it has plucked its feathers and taken out its claws, they grow back, and it emerges with new feathers, new claws, and it then starts to fly off, and it soars and goes even higher, and then it functions a lot better. So this commission is a cathartic moment for the ANC, I must say. It's a very difficult period for the ANC to go through, because whether people like it or not, the ANC is the governing party, and it has a dominant presence in the life of this country. It's got to renew itself, and this is what has brought us here. And our presence here and our support for the commission and our participation is that whole process of plugging out our claws and pulling out our feathers so that we may come out of this process new, as part of the renewal process. So this is what we are doing. Not that it was doubted, it was feared, it was contested, but in the end, this is where we are, and we've got to go through this process. And beyond your report, we should be able to fully renew ourselves and deal with the matters that brought us here.
Thank you. Mr. Pretorius.
The Chair has raised the issue a number of times, and we have, and in fairness, you have, Mr. President, and that is to try, over and above introspection, which is aimed at the future, but in retrospection, to look at the past, to try and understand how the things that did happen within the party actually happened in order to inform the way forward. And is there not, although this is succinctly stated, and it's in a sense carefully stated, it's nevertheless quite clear and firm, and it's noting part of the resolution of the 54th National Conference, which says, current leadership structures seem helpless to arrest these practices, either because they lack the means or the will, or are themselves held hostage by them. In other words, the practices of corruption and state capture. Is there not a need to look at that statement more carefully, to dissect it, to understand why this conference got to where it was and made the decisions it did?
Conference made that it was a noting statement, and And conference being a conference of more than 5,000 delegates from branches, the predominant views that are expressed at conference are from ordinary members who are representing the branches of the ANC. As conference reflected on this, it did correctly say we seem to be helpless, and the leaders seem to be helpless as well. And it's either they lack the will, or they themselves are captured in one way or another. But that's conference noting, and noting with a measure of sadness that this is where we are. Are you helpless? Are you? Do you lack the political will? So it's a proper analytical observation by delegates at the conference, and I agree with that. But would say it's not true that the entire leadership is captured. And it was an observation by the delegates. And in a way, the proper interpretation of that resolution means to me that prove to us as delegates that you, the leaders, you have the political will and you are not captured and you are going to do something about this. So for me, that is the flip side of the coin of that noting statement. So we then have, as a leadership, to prove to the membership that no, we as leaders who were then elected at that conference, we are not, and that is why we've fully embraced the decision that was taken at the conference that we will have this commission established, supported, and we will appear before it to come and testify, because we are now involved in a new process.
The concern remains, and perhaps it doesn't bear repeating more than once more, that this statement was made, and quite starkly made, in 2017. 3 years later, or almost 3 years later, you used the language of hyenas and accused number one in the dock. Is there a concern that the observer might legitimately have that although the will is there, the means or the achievements and the methods are not?
I would argue that the contrary is true now. The will is there. We are all, for instance, the conference having taken the decision, the National Executive Committee having endorsed that decision, also as clearly exemplified through the letter that I penned to members of the ANC, particularly after the COVID procurement debacle. And the NEC endorsed the fact that we now need to draw a line. We've got to underscore what we've been saying with now action. And that is precisely where we are headed to now. Because we don't want to keep talking about this forever and in a day. We now need to be seen to be taking action. So the will is there, the political will is there unquestionably. Secondly, the means are also articulated in the same resolution, that those who are in charge of certain key organs of state, like finance, like the police and all that, must act, and which is precisely what is now happening. You referred earlier to a multidisciplinary organ or entity that should investigate and up to prosecuting criminality. This is unprecedented. It's happening for the first time, where we have all these disciplines working together, but we will talk about that, I guess, in the next session. So the means are being found, the will is there, and there's clearly proving that where there may have been doubt that action is not being taken because people were either not having the will or the means or themselves captured, we're disproving that.
I think the resolution, or the noting in the resolution, was your leadership.
Yes.
We think some of you are held hostage, are captured.
Yes, sir.
But not all of you.
Yes, sir.
But some don't have the will.
Yes, sir.
Some have the will, but they don't have the means. But some of you are captured.
That's true.
Okay.
That's the noting part.
Yeah, that's the noting part.
Yeah.
Mr. President, if we could move briefly to another topic. Since the line was drawn in the sand, the most recent 2017-2018 line,
Yes.
the question that the chair would be interested in order to assist him to formulate his own recommendations, would be, what has the ANC tried to do, what has been successful, what has not been successful? And if I could assist in that analysis, Mr. President. As I understand it, for corrupt activities within the party, there are two categories of recourse. The one is internal discipline, or referral to the Integrity Committee. And the other is an external consequence or outcome, and that's criminal prosecution. Are records kept within the ANC of internal disciplinary proceedings and external criminal prosecution? Is there a record of that?
Chairperson, there would be a record of internal disciplinary proceedings because the disciplinary proceedings are quite formal. I used to be the chairperson of the National Disciplinary Committee of Appeal, and we kept formal records. There was nothing that was loose and informal. So they would be there. They would be scattered all over because the discipline starts right at the bottom, right through to the top. The criminal prosecutions one, I would doubt if we would have such a record because it's a much more state formal process, which I'm sure if we sought to find it, we would find it somewhere.
We may follow that up in due course, Mr. President, but for the moment, can I ask you please to go to page 38 of your own affidavit, paragraph 86. This is again in the category of recourse. Paragraph 86 reads, a recurring challenge in the management of organizational discipline is that in certain instances, the institution of disciplinary proceedings is dependent on a conviction in a court of law. This is particularly the case with respect to offences related to corruption and fraud. This has meant that the organization has been unable to act against members facing serious charges of financial impropriety until the completion of court processes, which can often be lengthy. Now, that statement can be understood in two senses. The first is that the ANC will only take disciplinary action once court proceedings have been concluded, or conviction in a criminal court is itself a ground for disciplinary action in terms of the ANC constitution. But whichever way it is regarded, is there any necessary logic behind the reservation that one has to wait for criminal proceedings to be concluded before internal disciplinary proceedings can take place? Should they not, as our law allows, be independently treated? Our law is quite clear that, or at least it is now, that in internal disciplinary proceedings in voluntary organizations or companies or elsewhere, even in state institutions, there's no right to remain silent. You may remain silent, but you suffer the consequences. You can still be disciplined. I don't want to get into detail and argue the law with you, but there's no need, there's no necessary legal barrier to internal disciplinary proceedings being instituted and completed before criminal conviction.
Yes, I think, Chairperson, the difficulty has always been a person is charged, and then at the same time, simultaneously, they are disciplined. They stand trial, and the disciplinary process has been done and concluded, and then they are found not guilty in the formal state, the law enforcement. Yeah. So what do you then do? Do you go back and undo? For instance, if the charge was theft in the ANC and the charge is theft in the state, what do you then do when they are found not guilty? And the way we've sought to deal with it is to say, if you have been charged, you should, of a serious crime that has to do with corruption and so forth, you should step aside. And you're then given an opportunity to go and clear your name while having stepped aside. Go clear your name, and having done that, then the disciplinary process in the ANC can then ensue. Unless, of course, you could be charged with the charge of bringing the ANC into disrepute by having stolen a chicken, stolen money, or whatever. That would be a different matter. But people will always want to link the two. So we've thought that the safest route is actually to say people should step aside, which we've provided for in our resolution.
Well,
yeah.
Why should it be only the ANC which has got this problem? Of course, Mr. President, with your trade union background, you know that in the workplace, for example, if an employee is alleged to have done something that is a criminal offense, the employer is not going to wait for the police to investigate and for him to be convicted. The employer will convene a disciplinary hearing, come to a conclusion, and if the police get involved and there's a criminal case, that's a different process governed by Criminal Procedural Act and the criminal law, but the employer is done. If the employee is aggrieved by the employer's decision, there are fora where to go to, there are processes where to go to and challenge it. And sometimes the decision in the criminal court and the decision in a disciplinary inquiry will be different, but the standards are different too, that are applied to determine the guilt and so on. Within government too, government departments, I know that the government departments are notorious for keeping people on suspensions for a long time.
They do that even to judges.
Judges have got certain processes that are compulsory, but the government departments have got no processes that are compulsory for them to wait.
Yes.
So, and I don't think that those delays are because they are waiting for criminal courts, but they've got those delays, but they don't need to have those delays. So the proposition is that that's not a good ground to delay. Every organization, has its own rules. You can't let somebody who you believe has done something completely unacceptable to your organization not be disciplined by the organization, because if you are going to wait until the outcome of a criminal case, which might finish in 3 years, and then there might be an appeal, which might take another 3 years, by the time that process is finished, how can you still say you are going to have a disciplinary hearing? So it's like you just wait for the courts, and when you can deal with the matters yourselves. So the proposition would be that the organization would need to reconsider that, because I don't think anybody else follows that route.
Well, I think, Chairperson, a political organization is very different from, say, a company and a non-governmental organization of another sort. This is an organization that is composed of very active members who take views and positions, and who, when they have a sense that they are being treated unfairly, respond. They can either go to court, disrupt your organizational processes and all that. And this is what we have thought would be fitting for us as the ANC, because it hasn't really been the practice to say, if you are charged, you must step aside. It hasn't been the practice. I know that in many organizations, including the private sector, that is the norm, that if you are charged, you immediately step aside. And some even do it voluntarily, because they fear that they will compromise the image and the integrity of the organization, so they step aside, and could also sometimes argue that, allow me space, I'll take a leave of absence to clear my name. And of course, it behoves on the organization itself whether they are going to prefer charges against that type of person. So for us, it has been a major step for the ANC to take, that when charged, you've got to step aside, and when serious allegations, you've got to go to the Integrity Commission and explain yourself. Now, this is a new way of dealing with issues that have to do with wrongdoing, and it needs space and time to be allowed. The ANC needs the space and time so that this new process, which will eventually emerge as a culture, should mature in the organization. I would argue that, suddenly changing it before it is tried and tested would lead to a lot of confusion. Hitherto, people have always argued that innocent until proven guilty, and they've always said, I stay where I am, come hell or high water, and yet it has an impact, a very negative impact on the integrity of the organization.
Yeah. Mr. Pretorius.
Thank you. There is a great deal of academic writing, which I'm not going to refer to. This is not an academic occasion, that says that in relation to corruption, a systemic approach should be adopted, and it's not enough simply to say, well, if someone does wrong, we must discipline or charge in a criminal court in whatever sequence. You yourself have mentioned, and the resolution at the 54th National Conference spoke about weakening of law enforcement agencies. That we can deal with if we have time next time around.
Sure.
But I'd like to raise it insofar as appointments and dismissals are concerned, because that is a topic we've dealt with here today and yesterday. The Constitution makes it very clear that the head of the NPA, the NDPP, National Director of Public Prosecution, has a term of 10 years, and it has emphasized in that judgment that that's very important because it goes to the independence and security of tenure of the office. It's an interesting fact that since 1994, or since the establishment of the NPA, not one NDPP has lasted his or her full term. And you have already taken certain steps, but perhaps these should be clarified not only in relation to the NPA, but other law enforcement agencies. What steps have been taken or considered by the ANC in relation to appointments of the heads of the law enforcement agencies and their security of tenure, and how they should be selected and how they should be appointed? I'm not going to ask you to account for the evidence that has been given over a long period of time before the chair about appointments and dismissals and the period under review by the Commission, but to look at and we all understand that this is a contributing factor, as the resolution does that we've spoken to. What steps in relation to appointment have been considered?
None. None have been considered. When I initiated the process of appointing the current head of the NPA, it was like uncharted territory, uncharted waters. And one did that precisely. We wanted to have a very transparent process, a process which everyone in the country would have confidence in, which would go through a number of candidates who would be interviewed by a selection committee, which I appointed at the time. It was headed by former Minister Jeff Radebe, who is well experienced and well steeped in doing this, and he helped considerably well in getting us to arrive at this point, and he was very, very scrupulous in going through a myriad of applications that we received. So that was a very good process. Whether we will do it for others is a matter that one would still need to consider. So in the ANC itself, no, it hasn't been discussed, including the tenure.
And appointments to the civil service, clearly that is a matter that concerns the ANC as a party, as we've heard, but also may be dealt with through legislation and elsewhere, as you've yourself pointed out. But is there any step that can be taken to isolate appointments and dismissals from patronage politics? Or was that too general a question, to be fair at this stage?
No, it isn't too general a question. We mean to put into effect what we have said, that we need to move away from the politics of patronage. We need to exercise fairness, openness, and equity. Now, those are generally accepted principles of doing things, and there's nothing wrong with approaching the appointment of people in that way. So, and that saves you from an attack on the issue of patronage, that so-and-so was appointed because they are going to be used for this and that purpose, or nepotism, and what have you. So those are principles that I would want to see observed as well.
Has any consideration then arising from your answer been given to precluding party officials or government employees from doing business with the state? I think that has been mentioned.
Yes, that has been mentioned, and when it comes to government officials, as clearly stated in our regulations and in our law, that it's prohibited. And you've got to declare your interests up front. And when it comes to even public representatives who are in the executive positions like ministers, that too is prohibited, and you've got to declare your interest as well. The one that has to do with, say, party officials who may not be employed in government, that is under discussion. We've got strong views on both sides. There are people who argue that what is wrong with me as a party official doing business with government, and others who hold a strong view that once you are a party official, you and your close relatives should not find yourself doing business with government. So the latter is still in discussion.
Then, has any thought been given to legislation specifically directed at governing executive employment and board appointments in state-owned entities? I know they are covered in certain disparate pieces of legislation.
So what was the question? Just
appointment of senior executives and board appointments in state-owned entities. Any consideration given to directed legislation?
Well, that falls under the rubric that I spoke about, that there are some really key top positions that we would still want to have well appointed. And for the rest, I mean, it should really depend on the entity itself as to who it appoints. We should never find ourselves bothering about the employment of the janitor to the building where the state-owned enterprise operates, or the sweeper, or, secretary or director. So we would only want to focus on those who have a bearing, whose appointment rather has a bearing on the general direction of the company or the entity. With regard to legislation, and of course, I mean, any legislation that would enhance good governance, good leadership, and everything that's good should always be welcomed. And the State-Owned Enterprise Council, which is a presidential state-owned enterprise council, is seized with this matter, if I can use a colloquial term like that, and is dealing with this, and we should be able to get really good outcomes. And in fact, there are already drafts that are going to be addressing precisely this issue.
There are two further topics that perhaps could be dealt with in the next round, Mr. President. And the first is the draft national implementation framework towards professionalization of the public service.
Yes.
I'm sure that would be of great interest to the chair.
Yes.
And the second is procurement reform and what is envisaged in relation to
Yes.
the legislation
That's
that
right.
might, that is on the table,
Yes.
present. I may then move to another topic, please. It is a topic related to the party financing in a way, or the allocation of party finances. In your statement, at page, or the annexure to your statement, and the Alliance Summit Declaration at page 750 of Bundle 1, there's talk of a creature called vote buying.
What page did you say it is?
750, Chair.
Thank you.
This is a statement made by the former president in 2015. He says,
Which page?
the statement begins at page 748.
48, yes.
I want to, if I may, Mr. President, refer to page 750.
Yes.
The last paragraph reads, among other things, we have identified the debilitating effect of money politics. Many comrades gave concrete examples of how some of us participate in the practice of buying other comrades to vote for us. And then on page 753, the last two paragraphs read, I want to talk briefly on the challenges we are having on the membership system, especially how we have approached it as primarily a technical matter. Virtually all comrades talked about this. Comrades have talked about instances where the membership system is abused, manipulated, and subverted. We have talked about people being given money and wined and dined in exclusive hotels. In other words, comrades here know who has been given money, by whom, when, how. The question is whether we reported this to the relevant structures. What has been done about it? Does a list exist of cases that are being investigated and what progress has been made? The officials and the National Working Committee should give urgent attention to this. Now, just by way of introduction, it would be obvious to any close observer that the practice of buying votes is a very important part of the circle of patronage politics. In other words, a person is put in an important position, accumulates wealth, is able then to buy membership of the ruling party. And that, if anything, is I don't suppose it's a matter that could even be debated, but I'll say it anyway, that the complete distortion of the constitutional democratic political system and freedom of association and the like. But do you have any comment on that practice? Has it occurred? To what extent has it occurred? What has been done to stop that practice?
Well, we have spoken about this practice of the usage of money and the usage of compromising comrades through money, vote buying, yes, even whining and dining, and just spreading money around. And when it comes to distorting our membership system, which former President speaks about here, steps have been taken to streamline our membership system so that it is not made subject to manipulation or to being hijacked by those who may want to just buy membership for others or pay membership for others. It is now digital. It's almost human-free in terms of the way it functions. It's like outside human-free. It depends on you, the member. You have to do work through your various other identity items or devices. So it frees us from manipulation. So that helps a lot, and what former President is talking about here is absolutely to the point. The one about whining and dining and handing out money and all that, it's much more difficult to deal with, I guess, because it happens in the shadows, in dark corners, in those types of places. In the end, you need to more broadly guard against, those who will be brought into various positions for patronage purposes. And this is where we will work very hard to uphold the values and the principles of the ANC, so that those who may get into the grip of such people could be minimized to a large extent.
You yourself, Mr. President, sorry, had you finished?
Yes, I had.
You yourself raised the issue in quite clear terms in paragraph 167.3 of your statement at page 74 of Bundle 1, if I can read it to you.
Yes.
The ANC has recognized the erosion over time of its organizational integrity as processes have been manipulated to advance the material interests of certain members and associated private companies and individuals. This manifests itself in weak and pliable branches, vote buying and gatekeeping, where certain potential members are deliberately prevented from joining or participating, factionalism, and even open conflict. This provides fertile ground for state capture and corruption. We've spoken about the patronage circle, where it compounds itself like compound interest, that the patron obtaining resources, favors, and money is able to cement his or her position through these processes. Do you have any comment on that articulation of the issue?
No comment except to say yes, and I agree entirely. Those are ills that we want to get rid of in the ANC. It will take time, but the will and the means are certainly there to ensure that we rid the organization of such ills.
Yeah. And it's, in effect, those branch members who elect senior officials in the party, who have a great influence on the way the country is run and what happens in the country, but also, in effect, the president. They elect the president of the ANC, who becomes the president of the country. So it's an enormous power in our democracy that can be so manipulated. It's a serious issue.
It is a very serious issue, and it is for that reason that we raise this issue, because it is serious, and we raise the level of consciousness and alertness against such deviant behaviors within our membership structure. So it's a process that we need to embark on, and we have already started with that one at least.
In your...
Mr. Pretorius, if we are going to go up to 4, maybe we can proceed up to 4 without an adjournment. If we are going to go to 5, maybe this might be the right time for a short adjournment.
Chair,
it depends on what you
certainly don't
think.
want to be presumptuous, but
Yes.
I think it's for the president to... it just appears to me that it's been 2 long days, and the president should be free to say whether and when.
Yes, can go home now.
With my permission,
Well, maybe whatever the position is, maybe let's take a 10 minutes break, whatever, whether it's going to be 4 or whatever. Let's take a 10 minutes break.
That's fine. Okay. That's fine with me.
We adjourn. President is the only one who's being questioned here. So maybe you are right to say we must find out whether he still stands where he was earlier, where he said we can go even up to 5. Is that still the position?
Yes, that's still the position.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I know that you are the only one standing who has been standing for some time. But I guess that if you still have issues to deal with, let's try and go up to 5 because the President is making himself available.
Yes, it will be till about 4:45 because
That's fine.
the President does have a closing statement he wishes to make.
Okay, no, that's fine.
So if I may go for, say, an hour, but I'm not sure I'll take that time in any event.
Yes, yeah.
Because I intend to wrap up.
Yeah, the idea is just that we must use every minute we can, that we should use if we still have issues to deal with.
I'm sure that where I fail, you will succeed. I'm sure if I stop early, you will be able to fill the time.
Okay, all right.
You have a section of your statement, Mr. President, that talks about the response of the ANC to allegations of state capture. And you deal with that at paragraph 93, page 41 and following. The concept of state capture has been defined by yourself. I don't want to put words into your mouth in your statement, but how do you understand the concept of state capture? It's still something that the chair will have to deal with in the fullness of time, but perhaps you could assist him in that regard.
Well, in our country, the concept of state capture really it's wrapped up with corruption, and it gained prominence as we were observing how certain interests had positioned themselves to have control over, state institutions in relation to the appointment of people to them, in relation to the resources of those institutions, and also how they had ensconced themselves with the political leaders who they sought to, as it appeared, to want to influence. And what we got to hear was how it manifested itself in the form of whisperings by those people about dispensing patronage, dispensing positions, appropriating government contracts in various state institutions as well. And that smacked of unlawful involvement in those institutions and undermined the processes, the known and legal processes that those institutions were supposed to have. And it was represented through a family who befriended certain people in government, up to and including getting those people to claim that these are our friends, and they even underpinned what they were doing with ideological articulations that they were advancing the concept of black economic empowerment. And as it evolved, you started seeing how even that concept of black economic empowerment was being undermined and, in fact, eroded because they tended also to monopolize and appropriate onto themselves nearly as many contracts as possible, and the most lucrative ones that pushed out your black economic empowerment players who, by dint of our own policies as government, we should have been placing more emphasis on, because they were previously disempowered and we needed to empower them. So the capture was multifaceted. And was so effective in that it was all pervasive. And it was in many ways done in the most clever way, because they tended to know which contracts are becoming available, where they are becoming available. But I guess, Chairperson, one will talk about that in the next session. So one should not get carried away. So that's how I understood the mutation of state capture.
That's fine. May I ask this question, because it crossed my mind earlier. I seem to have read somewhere, and maybe it was not true, that one or more of the Gupta brothers were members of the ANC. Would you know that at all, or is it something you don't know?
Chairperson, I also heard that. I never saw evidence or proof of that, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
There were certain signposts along the road of state capture history in the period under review, or alleged state capture, as the legal team we must confine ourselves to for the moment. The signs were quite clear. It deserves more attention, but perhaps if we have time in the next round, we can deal with them in more detail. But there was the address to the NEC by Mr. Mbalula. There was the Waterkloof landing and the response to the Waterkloof landing. I must say, in that regard, it is a matter of some amazement that Mr. Kolwani, who clearly breached security, became an ambassador with a security clearance. Should that not have caused huge outrage within the party?
Well, it did raise eyebrows, let me say. It raised quite a few eyebrows, but it happened as it did, and that's how it happened.
I see your eyebrows are raised as far as they can go. But perhaps that belongs in the state portion. It is such an alarming event that perhaps I should not comment further, but I couldn't resist mentioning it. Then there was the dismissal of Minister Nene and the appointment of Minister van Rooyen, and related to that was the March 26 revelation of Mr. Jonas. And you've dealt with that this morning. But those issues gave rise to at least one series of events that I think should be dealt with, and to one observation that I would wish to put to you for your comment. The series of events was the appointment of the internal inquiry. We know that the internal inquiry that was mandated by the ANC NEC received one written response. 8 people came forward with oral responses. And there was, as appears from your own bundle at page 126 and following, a sense that these 8 at least said they would prefer to make submissions to an independent body. How does one explain that? How does one explain, firstly, the failure of the internal inquiry, secondly, the sentiment that they would prefer to testify before an independent body, and thirdly, the fact that the knowledge was within the ANC and it didn't come out? What happened there? What is the explanation for that series of events?
Chairperson, I guess the inquiry that was initiated by the Secretary General was a rather proper process to follow, because he wanted, as the head of the SGO, that is Secretary General's office, to formalize the receipt of the complaints, because one person had complained publicly, and we realized that it's a much bigger problem, and let us elicit more of such. And in the event, only one person was prepared to put that in writing. The others, I guess for reasons best known to them, wanted a more formal process, which would do 2 things, which would be able to conduct a thorough investigation, and 2, which would in some ways also shield them so that they can speak freely. Because for a variety of reasons, because some of these things are so sensitive, people did not just want to talk about them freely and loosely. They wanted a more formalized process. And I think we should applaud them, because in many ways, those 7 are the unsung heroes and heroines who helped us to get to this commission, because they basically said, we are prepared to talk so long as there can be a formal process. That then led us to realize that this is a much bigger problem. We now need to advocate for the establishment of a commission. And that in many ways was the beginning processes of, in a way, demanding, advocating, and calling for the establishment of your commission, Chairperson. So I would say the realization within the ANC was growing, and this is where we are now.
Yes, Mr. Mantashe had certain comments to make about it. He said, in fact, that because of the low number of submissions, it would be a fruitless exercise for the ANC to investigate. He said, when they don't come forward to the ANC will not force them. It doesn't mean that we are walking away from it, but if you make allegations, then you must be bold enough to take the matter through. And then he did say the discussion of the ANC on state capture is going to continue for a long time. So he didn't see it as the end of the road, clearly. But you've commented on what it says about the 8 members concerned and what their view was. What does it say about the ANC? Did they trust the ANC as it was constituted at that time? And if they did not, why not?
I guess they did not distrust the ANC. They were rather grateful that their inputs had been solicited, because for them too it would have represented an opportunity, almost a valve to take out the tension and everything. But then again, knowing the limitations of a political organization like the ANC in terms of investigating, verifying allegations and all that, they felt that a more state-sponsored or appointed entity would be better placed and would be able to add also credibility more publicly. And I think it's less about not trusting the ANC and more about wanting a formal process.
But also, Mr. President, I must say that I have a feeling that there are many maybe current DGs, DDGs, and past DGs and heads of department who may be members of the ANC who must have known a lot of things that should have been brought before the Commission and who simply haven't responded positively both to my own calls for people in South Africa to come forward with information which I've made over the past 2.5 years, as well as to the calls by the ANC itself to say its members must come forward and assist the Commission. So one wonders what it is, because there must be so many others. Those who have come forward, who have testified, I think we applaud them, but I think they are a very small minority if one were to think of how many DGs and HODs and provinces and so on who must know quite a lot of things that happened.
Chairperson, I think we need to look at the personal circumstances of people because the human element does kick in. Your commission is a very highly publicized forum. It takes guts and courage for anyone to come here to testify, and I have been filled with awe as I've looked at the many people who have come before the Commission to testify. Others have had to come, they've been directed to come, and some you've subpoenaed, and others have volunteered. So it's not everyone who will be inclined in that way and who will have that type of courage to have their testimony in public,
yes,
and under the scrutiny of the media. And sometimes people may think it's career limiting.
I suspect so.
It's career. It could affect their families. It could affect them personally and their career prospects. So it's not easy, sir, to come before you. People come here trembling and fearful. So it's not everyone who is brave enough to come here.
Thank you. Mr. Pretorius.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. President, there was over time in the period under review a series of approaches to the ANC and to the ANC leadership, both from within and from without the party, in relation to the observation of state capture, and I'll ask you about your own in due course, and its manifestations, and a frustration amongst many. There was the memorandum from the veterans. You will recall that that's dealt with at page 517 of Bundle 02 for the record. There was the letter from the Stalwarts Foundations. You will recall that. There was the memorandum from the Directors General. You will recall that. There was the inquiry conducted by the South African Council of Churches, and there was, of course, the Public Protector inquiry. In that context, I want to put to you, if I may, and if I'm taking it out of context, you will pull me up for it. Paragraph 103 on page 45 of your affidavit, where you say another important development during this time was the decline in the ANC's electoral support in the local government elections of August 2016. Opinion research at the time indicated that the issue of corruption was becoming an issue of greater concern amongst voters, and that it was among the factors that contributed to the ANC's weaker performance. This was one of the more direct ways, although not the only one, in which public opinion contributed to a shift in the ANC's response to state capture. Let me repeat that last sentence. This was one of the more direct ways, although not the only one, in which public opinion contributed to a shift in the ANC's response to state capture. Now, you will recall, Mr. President, our discussion at the beginning of your evidence yesterday when we spoke about the leadership role of the party, which you acknowledged. If an observer was to say to you what the ANC did here was not to respond to the glaring signals of state capture and corruption in the period under review, even those various approaches made from within and without the party did not seem to take hold until the truth of the loss of electoral support hit home, and that was the reason the ANC reacted. In other words, not as leader, but as follower. What would you say to that observation?
Well, it is true that it was the reaction of ordinary South Africans that was demonstrated through the electoral support that got the ANC to sit up and reflect on what corruption and state capture was doing to its fortunes. Even that issue alone was contested in the ANC. There were those who did not think so, though they were a minority, but the majority took heed. And this became apparent leading to those elections with the various election surveys that the ANC does, which is done by nearly every political party. Wherever we went, and as we engaged with people, the number one issue that people were concerned about was corruption / state capture. They were most unhappy that the movement that they loved so much seemed to be so deeply immersed in corruption and seemed to have been captured, because as all these reports came out, and particularly the emails issue, it had a negative impact, whether one likes it or not, a very, very negative impact. The integrity of the party, the image of the party was dented, and that was reflected in the electoral returns. So that in itself also had a huge impact on getting the ANC to then have a sense that it needed to do something, because otherwise it would just see a continued slide in its electoral fortunes. Yeah.
Well, for yourself, Mr. President, what were the signposts along the road or along the way of the path of state capture that first alerted you to the existence of something much more than corruption? What was it for you that alerted you to the fact that state capture was a phenomenon that needed to be dealt with?
Should I answer you on that now or when I come back as President
maybe
of the
both,
Republic?
perhaps a summary now, an executive summary. But if it's something you need to think about...
Which is exactly what I wanted to plot out very, very clearly and carefully, because I want to look at the various markers for me that indicated where we were. And just like yesterday when I said, you asked me a very good and clear question. What is it that we believe were the indicators that things were going wrong and what should be done, which is what I will undertake to focus more attention on when I return for the next session.
So if you could also consider that there were these markers and signals and approaches on the one hand, and then there were almost contemporaneously events that seemed to counter what ought to have been recognized. For example, the closure of the bank accounts and the response of the ANC cabinet and the top six to that. That's maybe a matter that could be dealt with. But if one looks at a timeline of warning signals and actions taken and actions not taken, and look actually at what was happening within government at the time, there is a call for an explanation which would take me, and happy to wait for the fuller explanation, because after all, the reason you've given 2 days of your time so far, Mr. President, is to give a full explanation, a considered explanation, and that's obviously understandable.
Let me say the issue that you've raised, what were the markers for me, it's contained in my statement, which you haven't seen yet. You've just seen the headlines, the contents. The full statement is still going to be handed in, and it will deal with that. It's not a question of avoidance now. It's a question of seeking to do it systematically. So that I don't do it on a piecemeal basis.
No, that's
fine. By way of summary, there are two issues that I'd like to deal with. One is a summary on deployment, just to put very clearly where the Commission and the legal team stands on the evidence. The other is to outline, by way of summary, what we discussed earlier, that it seems clear that there's an acknowledgement by yourself on behalf of the party, Mr. President, that there's no doubt, this is in the evidence that you've put up, that corruption and state capture to a serious degree is acknowledged. No question about that issue. There may be debate about the degree.
Yes.
And those issues will be dealt with by the Chair finally in reviewing 3 years of evidence before the Commission. The second area, perhaps, could be more systematically explored, and that is, how could these things happen? What was going on within the party that allowed these things to happen to the extent that they did? And we've had certain clues and signs and resolutions and the like. And perhaps it will be up to the Chair to translate the careful political language in the resolutions into more clearly directed language, and I'm sure the Chair will not shy away from it. But it does, I think, require a more systemic approach, particularly in regard to the second round, where we will look. And the third thing is the way forward in terms of the proposed legislation and reforms, procurement, deployment, appointments, dismissals, boards, SOEs, and the like. And perhaps that will be summarized the next time round. But there's one gap, that we have not dealt with, and that's accountability. We've closed the door gently on the past, but we haven't really spoken of who should be called to account and for what. Now, again, that's up to the chair to deal with. It's wrapped up with the question of law enforcement agencies. But certainly I think that, certainly there is a view that accountability should be a priority in this whole process. We can't just shut the door gently on the past. And perhaps, apart from internal discipline, which we've dealt with, the question of accountability before law enforcement agencies, how that is going to be approached, what is to be done, whether it should be done, or whether we should just leave the door to be shut gently, can be discussed in the next round, because it is a matter of state governance, law enforcement agencies, and the like. And the final issue that perhaps should be closely explored, it's a sensitive issue, but it's an issue that certainly I think should be dealt with. Those institutions of government whose job it was to alert government leadership of what was really happening. Where were they? Were they disempowered? Were they misdirected? What happened there? And that, I think, is an important element for understanding what happened, how it should have happened, or how it could have happened, and why it wasn't detected and prevented earlier. And I'm talking particularly about state security agency matters that we can deal with next time.
You are done.
Done. Well, yes, in more ways than one.
But you are done for now?
Yes, Chair.
Yeah. Is there an answer?
Apart from the closing statement that the President wishes to make.
But you haven't asked him a question that he still needs to answer, is that right?
No.
Yeah, okay. Well, Mr. President...
Certainly it's not been interpreted as a question.
Well, let me ask you this, let me raise this issue with you, Mr. President. The current electoral system that we have doesn't give the people, the voters, the right to choose, to elect their president. That's the president of the country. It allows each political party that is taking part in elections to put up its own candidate, and the voters know that if I vote for this party, this will be this candidate, or their candidate will be the president. Now, I can't remember whether there is a requirement legally that each party must indicate who its presidential candidate is at the time of campaigning or not. Probably it can change, I'm not sure. But basically, the voters don't elect the president. They vote for a party, and effectively, the majority party in parliament after the elections will get their own candidate to be voted as president. Now, what do you say to the proposition that that system puts at least some voters in a predicament if the party that they would like to vote for and that they love puts up a candidate that they consider to be unsuitable to be president, because they can't say, I'm voting for the party, but not for this person. If they vote for the party, they are taken to have voted for that candidate. And yet they know they don't want this candidate because they don't think the candidate is suitable. But that is the system as it stands. What would you say to the proposition that consideration should be given to changing that part of the system, at least, to enable the president of the country to be voted directly by the voters, so that the system would be, if I want to vote for this party, but I don't want their candidate because I think they've made a wrong choice, but I see somebody else who is a good candidate, I can vote for that person. I'm not tied to either this party that I like or nothing. So in other words, you give the power to the people to that extent. Obviously, each party could still say, so-and-so is our candidate, presidential candidate. But when you come to the actual voting, a vote for the party is not necessarily a vote for that candidate. You can vote separately. And in that way, the president of the country comes directly from being voted by the people. And in a way, parties are encouraged to put up candidates that are suitable. Because if they put up candidates that might not be suitable, the voters might not vote for them. Have you got some views on that?
Lots of views, Chairperson. Lots and lots of views. It's a proposition that is quite complex and obviously requires a lot of time. And maybe it goes to the origins of our constitutional construct. Because when we started off, and maybe it was a problem of learning from so many constitutions around the world, that we ended up wanting to craft a different path. And in crafting a different path, we opted for a Westminster type of system, but which is not, full Westminster process. Because with Westminster, it is party-based, but it is also constituency-based, which is what obtains in, say, Lesotho, which is pure Westminster, which is what obtains in the UK. So we, in a way, opted for that, but at the same time, we opted for no constituency at the national and provincial level, but still went for constituency and proportional representation at the